Welcome to Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. He is back. He is Dean Logan. He is the Registrar Recorder of Los Angeles County. For nerds like me, it's all about voting, and I'm so glad you're here because you know I love learning about voting and the trends that we've seen. Let's go back to November 2016. What do we know about voter turnout here in Los Angeles County?
So if you look back at the last three presidential elections, so we always, kind of the benchmark was 2008 because we had phenomenal turnout in 2008.
Almost 82%.
Right, almost 82% of registered voters. That dropped down to just under 71% in 2012 when Obama was reelected.
Right.
This year, a lot of speculation that we were going to see potentially record turnout again. Actually dipped below 2012. We were just under 70%. So as a percentage of registered voters in the county, we dropped, but if you look at the raw numbers of votes cast, we had more votes cast in LA County than any previous election. So what that tells us is that we have made progress in terms of voter registration. So I think voter registration has outpaced growth. I mean, some of that is just population growth, but I think we've also, through the reforms in California, we've enabled eligible citizens to get registered in ways that they hadn't been able to do before. And I think that shows out what we still have is this lag of people who are actually registered to vote actually showing up and casting them out.
But we had almost 200,000 more votes cast in 16 versus
than in
08. Or even
or in
both. I mean, both cycles. So like you said, even though the numbers in terms of percentages dropped, the raw votes was much higher.
Right, and some of that also could be, mobility of population. So there could be people who are still on the rolls that have moved out of the county, and that has to catch up. But it's an interesting statistic to look at. But I will say that I think that there was some disappointment in that, because I think there was early on speculation that the turnout could skyrocket. And I think the dynamics of the presidential contest, we always struggle on the West Coast with when do they call the race.
But it was not called early. I mean, it was very
wasn't.
tight until the end, and actually a surprise for most.
Right.
Most thought the Democratic nominee would be successful.
But I think the surprise is maybe the point, right? Is that there were a lot of people, I think, perhaps in California, who thought,
the Democrat would win.
Contest, and then we're surprised to wake up Wednesday morning and find out that
Let's talk about early voting. I live on the west side of Los Angeles. I had friends that flooded to Culver City to vote in person early. Some came back. I guess that's a blessing and a curse. It shows success, but tell us about early voting.
It is a blessing and a curse. I mean, the history of that is that we haven't had early voting in LA County for the past 8 years because of voting systems technology. And you and I have talked about that before. The touchscreen voting equipment that was originally rolled out for early voting was decertified by the previous Secretary of State. So, but we had research that showed that across the country, early voting was very popular. So we felt like we had to offer something in 2016. We offered it in 5 locations around the county. Obviously, 5 locations in a county the size of LA is not sufficient, but we wanted to see what the reaction was. It was a very cumbersome process because essentially what we were doing is issuing people in person a vote-by-mail ballot. So very cumbersome and tedious process. But I think was worth doing. We had over 48,000 voters who showed up to do that. There were lines, and that's not what we want ideally. Although if you talked to the people in those lines, it was very interesting because what we heard from them is they knew they had the option of voting on election day or voting by mail. They wanted to do that. They wanted to vote early, and they wanted to do it in that kind of public stance. So I think it was validating in the sense of the direction we're moving in LA County and California towards a vote center model is the right direction. I think that was borne out by those statistics, and we need to accelerate that to the extent we can.
Let's talk about vote by mail.
Sure.
We had about 2.5 million ballots issued in 2016.
Record number.
What percentage of those approximately were returned?
So we had about just under 1.3 million of those returned by mail. So
that's about half, a
little more than half returned. But the overall turnout, about 35% of the overall turnout in the election were ballots cast by mail. Now,
and how is that compared to other presidentials?
It's actually, for LA County, it's pretty consistent. It's upticking a little bit. LA County has always been unique in this sense. You look around the rest of the state and you see where the majority of the votes are cast by mail. LA County, and I don't know if that's a combination of just kind of the political culture of our county or the age of our voting equipment. I mean, our vote by mail ballot is not particularly intuitive or user friendly, and that's going to change over the next 4 to 8 years. But yeah, we've always trended a little bit behind that in terms of vote by mail.
So if someone is a vote by mail voter and shows up at the polling place without their vote by mail ballot,
Right.
what happens?
And that was a big issue in this election. Either people who were listed as vote by mail voters but who said they didn't receive their ballot or chose to go to the polls
Right.
instead. So your option then is if you take the blank vote by mail ballot and then surrender that at the polling place, then you can
You're
vote
good.
a regular ballot.
Oh.
Otherwise, you vote a provisional ballot. And then once we verify that you didn't also cast the vote by mail
Sure.
ballot, then that ballot is counted. So in this election, 500,000 provisional ballots, which is a huge number.
Were accepted.
500,000 issued at the polling places. 87% of those turned out to be valid.
That's
and
a big
were
number.
counted. It's a huge number.
So let's talk about the notion of provisional ballots, because the minute you hear provisional ballots, there's in the background,
Yeah.
well, are these fraudulent? Are these undocumented voters? We know that the new president has made some claims debunked by most, if not all,
Right.
that 3 to 5 million voted that shouldn't have pursuant to a fraudulent intent, fraudulent means. What can you tell us about this boogeyman of voter fraud?
Well, I think it's a frustrating dialogue, and it's a changing narrative. I mean, 1 week it's 3 to 5 million illegal voters. The next week it's people who are on the rolls who shouldn't be on the rolls. Those are two different things,
Right.
obviously.
But what was interesting about the new president's statements regarding voter fraud is he went after California very specifically.
He did, absolutely did.
And in large part because when you look at his margin, I mean, Hillary Clinton basically doubled his vote total.
Right.
She won California by 7 points more than Barack Obama did in 2012. And so California apparently was a sore spot for the new president.
Right, and what's frustrating about that is the new president, as well as other people who have made these claims, offer no evidence of that. So they make these claims, they get a lot of attention, a lot of fanfare about illegal votes, people who aren't eligible who are participating in our elections. They make claims about our election laws in California that actually are no different than they are in any other
Right.
state in the country. The reality is nobody, and we've we've said, look, if you're going to make that claim, give us the data to back that up, and they have not been able to do
Well,
that.
they did present someone to back up the claim, but that someone's data has been debunked.
Right, and they've backed away from that data.
Right.
They said, well, we still need to crunch those numbers some more. And I'm like, well, how can you crunch those numbers if you've already quantified what you believe to be
And what's
illegal
also
activity?
interesting about these allegations is the opponents of the allegations are both Democrats and Republicans.
Right.
So you have some Republican secretaries of state that are very, I guess I'll use the word offended.
Well, I think it's a dangerous thing to do, especially if it's not backed up, because it causes people, the public, to question the integrity of the elections process, which is the foundation of our democratic form of government, our participatory form of government. And at some point, you have to ask the question of, is that the intent? Is this really the intent to suppress the voter turnout and the participation? And that's something that we're going to fight back against in California very strong.
How?
By using our own data to show that actually we do have checks and balances in place. And that in California, when you get a driver's license, the DMV does have a distinction between
Right.
those who are citizens and those who are not. And those who are not citizens will not be prompted to get the question for voter registration. And we can show the list maintenance activities that go on throughout our process.
Okay. His name is Dean Logan. He is the Registrar Recorder of Los Angeles County. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you so much for joining us on Local Edition.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's